Okay. DBrock, should we get started?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So welcome everyone. New player workshop. Like I said, this is for new players to learn the basics of D&D before your first session. Just have a general idea of what's going on and
Mhm.
hopefully be less confused. You'll probably still be confused, but hopefully less confused. Um, so I think to start, we'll go over some terms and dice that are common in D&D but less common elsewhere.
Oh,
First are the tools we
DBrock, one
use
second.
for.
Just in case, some people might be new to Discord, just to make sure they know you're streaming your screen. Um, if you're new to Discord and you don't see the screen right now, DBrock01 you can see in the sidebar, or if you click on the special events voice channel, there will be a watch stream button, or you can also double click on DBrock in the left hand side there, and that should pop up his screen, and you should see right now he's on the terms and dice slide. And if you're having any issues, you can. We're going to be monitoring for chat in the special events text channel, which is above us in Discord. And if you're on Twitch, you can also post there, and I'll keep an eye on both of those spots for DBrock here.
By the way, Sam, I see there's a couple people in the getting started voice channel. Do you think they're in the wrong place and want to drag them down, or?
Yeah, I can do that. Let's see here. Okay, there we go.
All right,
Um, okay, cool, good call.
here we
And
go.
oh yeah,
So as I said,
go kick it off.
this is a new player workshop, coming over the very basics of D&D, hopefully to get you less confused before your first session. These are some of the terms that are used in D&D, less so elsewhere. First is the tools we use for playing D&D online, which has been very helpful during the pandemic. D&D Beyond is the website that um, pretty much everyone I know uses to keep track of characters and stuff. Um, this is what the character sheet on D&D Beyond looks like. And it's just a very convenient website that has all the rules and sources and is really good for organizing information. So pretty much everyone will use D&D Beyond. And if you're playing in a newbie session, I think you need to make your character sheet on D&D Beyond. So very useful tool. Beyond 20 is a browser extension for D&D Beyond that lets you link your character sheet from D&D Beyond to a virtual tabletop like Roll20 or Astral. Um, and Roll20 is like this. It's just a virtual tabletop. You put tokens down to indicate creatures and players, and you can put terrain in here. It's just a way to play D&D online without actually sitting at the table. Astral is another virtual tabletop. From what I've seen, it's split about 50-50 with people using Astral or people using Roll20. But both of them are just generally a picture where you can see what's happening in your D&D game. Beyond 20, I'll just give a quick demonstration. If you make a roll from your D&D Beyond character sheet, you can see it shows up in the Roll20 tab here. It just links the two pages together, basically. Character, monster, and NPC. Those are terms that are used to refer to creatures in the D&D world. Characters are what players control. Pretty much it. You'll have 3 to 6 characters in a party, each one controlled by a player. Monsters are generally enemies, like a dragon or a troll kind of thing. And NPCs are characters who are not controlled by players, but are controlled by the DM. And you don't necessarily have to fight them. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, but um, it's just something good to know. So character is what you control, monster is an enemy, and NPC is just a bystander that the DM controls. Alignment is very D&D focused. It goes kind of a Bach from lawful to chaotic and good to evil. I'm sure most of you have heard of it before. It's just a general description of how a character views the world. Like a lawful good character would try to do good in the constraints of the law, and a chaotic good character would try to do good, but doesn't really care so much for the boundaries of the law. It's not super important in fifth edition. It was more so in previous editions, but it's something you'll hear people talk about, so it's good to know what it means. AC and DC are just terms that are used pretty much exclusively in D&D. AC is armor class. It's a statistic a character has that says how hard they are to hit with an attack. And DC is difficulty class, and that's just how difficult something is to do. And you'll see those go from about 10 to 20 or even higher than 20. Then let's take a look at the dice that we use in D&D. The most common is the D20. I'm sure you'll hear all about it, nat 20s. This is what it looks like. And this is the generic dice. If you need to make a roll in D&D and you don't know what die to use, it's probably going to be this one. The D12, D10, D8, and D4 are all used less often, mostly for stuff like weapon attack damage and modifiers to other rolls. If something wants you to roll one of these dice, which just have that many sides, then it will specifically state in the ability or attack what you roll. So, for example, if I'm using Bardic Inspiration and it says to roll a d8 to add to the next attack or ability check, this is a die I would roll. Hopefully, all of you already know what a d6 is. D100 is a little different. There are dice with 100 sides, but they're basically spheres. So what most people use are two 10-sided dice, one for the tens place and one for the ones place. Players don't use these very often, DMs more occasionally, but it's still not a very common die to use. But if you see a couple dice that have, the tens place here, and you wonder why this is why, so you can roll them and you can tell the difference between 90 and 9. Any questions on this so far?
No questions posted to Twitch or the Discord, but yeah, just as a reminder, that's the special events text channel. If you have any questions, and Twitch chat I'll feed over as well. So feel free to post if you have something.
Right. Now we'll take a look at D&D Beyond and your D&D Beyond character sheets. So this is a D&D Beyond character sheet. This is a Centaur Ranger. I played it in the campaign a while back. You can see he's level 8, named Crastor, and that's just a funny picture I found for a Centaur. And there's a lot of numbers here. It can be very confusing, a lot of information. But it all kind of boils down to applying these numbers here to other stuff. These are the basic numbers that determine what your character is good at. So we can see on Crastor, we have a strength of 18, which is very good. This is a strength-focused character. A dexterity of 15, a constitution of 12, an intelligence of 10, a wisdom of 14, and a charisma of 8. These are just generally what you apply, and all these numbers down here come from these numbers up here. So for example, animal handling, you can see there's a little wisdom next to it, and the +2 is the same as the +2 from wisdom up here. We'll get to what all these numbers mean in a little bit. First, we'll go over the rest of the sheet. For D&D Beyond, we have this kind of area here, which is a bunch of tabs. And these basically show what your character can do. First tab is the Actions tab, and it's just your generic actions. You can see you've got Longbow Attack, a Spear Attack, some other things that this character can do as an action. And it also lists different types of actions. So we've got normal actions, bonus actions, reactions, other stuff. This is where you'll be rolling attack rolls from generally. Next tab is spells. These just lists all the spells your character has, and one of the neat things about D&D Beyond is that if you click on the name of something, it will show you what that does. Absorb elements is more complicated. So we look at Cure Wounds. We can see you have to touch a creature and it regains hit points. Pretty simple spell, healing spell. And this is just a good way to list all your spells and press cast, and it will show how much healing you have. Next, I'm going to skip inventory for now and go to features and traits. I think this is the most important tab on D&D Beyond because it shows everything about your character aside from these numbers. This tab and these numbers are literally everything about your character. And there's a lot of stuff here, a lot of descriptions. But this will explain where you get all your abilities and why you can do what you can do. So for example, if we just scroll down a little here, we can see that I have favorite enemy from being a ranger, and it describes what that does and what it means. And also fighting style, all these things. This is what your character does, what makes your character special. It's got stuff from your class. This is all from ranger. Racial feats. This is from being a centaur. And feats that you take as part of your character build. So I took Polar Master on this character, and that's described here what that does. Pretty simple that way. And just kind of lists off everything and how much it all weighs and all that. And one thing to note is these little boxes show if an item is equipped or not. So for example, you can see this shield is currently equipped. If I click the box and take it off, the armor class goes down. If you want to add items to your character, like for example, I just bought a shiny new breastplate for Craft Store, you go to Manage Inventory, and you can spell it correctly, find the item you want, your equipment, equip it, and the armor class just went up a bunch more. And then the final tab here is description. This is just mostly background information from your character. You can see Craster is an Outlander, got some personality traits, ideals. You don't have to reference this tab very much, but it's good to have it to know the background of your character. Oops, that's not what. All right, now let's take a look at these numbers here and see what they actually mean. So the ability scores are the base numbers. Once again, these are these numbers up here, and they're just a general measure of how good your character is at stuff. So the higher your strength score, the stronger you are. Dexterity is generally related to agility. Constitution is how tough you are, how much of a beating you can take. Intelligence is how smart you are. Wisdom is slightly different from intelligence, and you've probably heard people joking about the difference. But wisdom is more like knowing what the right thing is to do in certain circumstances, and intelligence is more bookish knowledge. And then charisma is just how you come off to people and how good you are at interacting socially. 10 is the baseline. An average humanoid is 10 across the board. And you can see that these numbers here generate modifiers, which I have in the bigger box. And these modify all the other things you have. So a strength of 18 means my ability modifier is +4, which applies to anything that uses strength that I try to do. So for example, if I make an attack with a spear, I add my strength modifier and my proficiency bonus for a +8. But if my strength was 16, it would be +7. So having higher strength directly relates to hitting more often with my spear. It also affects a bunch of these skills and saving throws. We'll get into that later. In addition to the stuff on the sheet, strength and dexterity modify a couple extra things. Strength modifies encumbrance, how much your character can carry. Usually that's not a big deal, but if you're using variant encumbrance, it might be important. I also can modify how far you can jump. Comes up more often than you would imagine. Dexterity is the big one. Dexterity modifies your armor class and your initiative. Both just a generic plus, so armor class is more complicated than that. But it's the only thing that modifies initiative and adds to armor class. It's a very important stat. Dexterity can also be used to make attacks with some weapons, like this longbow attack uses my dexterity modifier +2 instead of strength because it's a ranged weapon. And you can see it has a +6 to hit instead of a +8. Constitution, the big thing it does is give you more hit points. If you have higher constitution, you get more HP. Pretty simple. Intelligence, wisdom, and charisma don't add any extras. Mostly in combat, they're used for spell casting, for wizards, druids, sorcerers, that sort of thing. And those guys use their spell casting stat in the same way that a ranger uses strength to hit with a spear. But they also have effects outside of combat. Another thing that these modify is the saving throws. You can see this box here. These things are kind of a defensive measure similar to your armor class, but against different types of attacks. And once again, it's just a straight modifier. If you're a wiser character, you have a better wisdom saving throw. Proficiency. This is something that comes into play all over the place. You might notice that we have these little black dots by stuff, and you can see if I hover over it says it's proficient, and the bonus is higher. And you can see the proficiency bonus is listed up here as +3. Proficiency is basically a measure of what your character is good at beyond the ability score. It's something you've trained in. So, for example, Craster is proficient in acrobatics, which means he's trained in acrobatics. He's more agile, better at doing flips and stuff. I don't know if a centaur can do flips. In athletics, you can see that these are higher because you add your proficiency bonus in as well as your ability modifier. So that's how you end up getting all of these numbers here. So acrobatics, you add your dex modifier and your proficiency because I'm proficient to get +5. Animal handling, I'm not proficient, so it's just wisdom for a +2. And it's just that whole way down the list, just add them together and you end up with these modifiers. Proficiency also affects saving throws. Each class has 2 types of saving throws that they're proficient in. For rangers, it's strength and dexterity, and you can see that those are higher than the other saving throws. It also affects your attack rolls. +8 is more than +4 because it has a +3 proficiency bonus, and it is a magical spear that adds +1. So really, all these numbers come from adding the modifier, sometimes the proficiency bonus, and very rarely any magic items that affect it. That's just how you get all these numbers. That's where they all come from. Then we'll go into what they all do a bit later. By later, I mean right now. So let's talk about skills. That's these things here. There's 17 of them or something, and they're just a general idea of different skills your character can have that are not strictly related to just how strong they are or how fast. Stuff you'd have to train at to be better. Generally, it's up to your DM as to how to apply them, though some are pretty straightforward in their applications. And this is another good thing about D&D Beyond. Once again, you can click them, and it will tell you exactly what they're supposed to be applied to. So you can see, because you're attempting to stay on your feet, you're trying to run across ice, balance on a tightrope, all the stuff is acrobatics. And you can do the same for any of these skills. And any character sheet on D&D Beyond will have all of these. So if you have your own character sheet, you can go there and click on this stuff and read through and see what all the skills do. A quick side note, we also have the passive skills. These are to stop you from constantly saying, I want to make a perception check, where it just takes the average roll for your perception check and says, you'll have that constantly without having to tell the DM exactly that you want to make a perception check for every foot you take. And finally, on the D&D Beyond sheet, we have the proficiencies and languages. This is not super important. It's more of a for your reference, but it's just the extra things your character can do that might be useful sometimes. So you can see Crastor is proficient. He's got medium armor, light armor, and shields. So that lets him wear the breastplate shield he has equipped. Martial weapons and simple weapons, so he can use a spear and a longbow. Longbows are martial, spear is simple. I got proficiency in drums. It's never come up, but who knows? And these are the languages he speaks. And you can go through and modify some of the stuff if your character changes over time. But you would have to talk to your DM before modifying that stuff. And I should go ahead and mention the stuff up here. We'll cover exactly what armor class and speed do in a bit. But we have defenses and conditions. These are things to track during combat. Crastor is resistant to fire. I think he got a blessing from a Fey portal. No active conditions, and then your current hit points, your max HP, and any temporary HP you have is listed here. And if you want to damage your character, you get hit by a giant or something, you just put how much damage you take in this box and click damage. And if you get healing, it's the same thing, click heal. Pretty simple. This is one of the great things about D&D Beyond. It's very easy to track your current character's condition. Inspiration is a thing that some DMs use, and it's gives you advantage on your next roll. But it's something that you don't use without talking to your DM about it. All right, that's the whole character sheet gone over and the skills and ability scores. I know it's kind of fast and you might not have caught all of it. So feel free to ask any clarifying questions on if you're confused on anything.
Yeah, we have one in the Discord chat. Are you able to see that, or do you want me to read it off?
I don't see it right now. If you can read it off.
Yeah, it looks like it's from Caitlin Moments. For those perception numbers, are those numbers what you need to roll in order to be able to perceive?
This is where the DC, the difficulty class, comes in. Perception is generally contested by stealth. So if you're trying to see a creature, maybe it's trying to sneak up on you in camp or whatever, you have your perception. Let's say I get a 15 on perception, and they are trying to sneak up with their stealth roll. So they would roll stealth, and they get a 21, which is very good. If I'm not actively looking for them, like I'm just on watch by a campfire, my passive perception of 15 is not enough to see the 21 stealth. It's also used for other things, trying to see stuff that's far off or notice stuff that's weird. Generally up to your DM, but this is where the DC comes in. Anything you're using perception for will have a DC, a difficulty class, either set by your DM or opposed by someone trying to stealth. And you'll compare your perception roll to that difficulty class to figure out what happens. So if I roll perception and I get a 20, and the difficulty class is 18, then that means I passed and I see whatever it is there is to see. In general, if you're rolling for one of these, your DM will ask you to make a roll, and then you just do the roll, and then he tells you what happens. Any other questions?
Nothing. Nope, nothing in Discord or chat. But looks like they that helped clarify that question about
All right.
perception there.
One thing I just realized I forgot to mention is with the ability scores, how you calculate the modifiers is just ability score minus 10 divided by 2, rounded down. So you can see in this example here, strength 9 minus 10 divided by 2 is -1/2. Rounded down is -1. That's the modifier. And for every 2 your score increases, your ability modifier increases by 1. All right, moving on to the fun stuff, combat basics. So how do you actually use these numbers in combat, and how are they applied? Well, first we need to talk about the framework of combat, which is rounds, turns, and initiative. Combat is conducted in rounds, and every creature in the combat gets a turn in the round. And the order of these turns is determined by their initiative roll. So, for example, if we have Craster here fighting a Wyvern, we'll have Craster roll initiative, and the Wyvern roll initiative. We can see Craster got a 5 on initiative, and the Wyvern got a 17. Um, so I will go ahead and show how this might look if you were using Roll20. And here we have, this would be one round in combat. So first the Wyvern would go on their turn, and then Craster would go on his turn. And it goes until combat ends somehow. Either someone flees or someone dies, or maybe there's a peaceful solution. I've heard it happen sometimes. Um, in combat, on your turn, there are 3 basic things you do. You have your movement, your actions, and your bonus actions. And these are listed on your character sheet. So for Craster, we can see he has a 40-foot movement. Most characters, that will be 30 feet. Craster has a bonus because he is a centaur. And you can see listed here all the actions that D&D Beyond has detected that Craster can take. So if we look under action, we'll see attacking actions mostly and a couple extra things. Primeval awareness is a ranger thing. And then there's also casting spells. Some of them take actions, some take bonus actions. It's specified in the spell what it takes. Bonus actions are kind of extra things. It's not a lesser action, it's more of a different action. You cannot substitute bonus actions for actions and vice versa. So if I have something that's a bonus action, say casting Hunter's Mark is a bonus action, I cannot do that as an action. I have to use my bonus action to do it. And you can also not do anything that's an action as a bonus action. So on your turn, you get these 3 things. You can move up to your movement speed, which is 40 feet for Craster. So maybe he wants to get closer. He can take an action and a bonus action as well. So for him, his bonus action would be casting Hunter's Mark, and his action would be shooting his longbow at this wyvern. And that would be his turn in combat. Do note that these things, action, bonus action, and movement, can be done in any order. So if I wanted, I could come back and shoot the longbow first, and then move closer. Or I could move a little closer, cast Hunter's Mark, shoot the longbow, and then move back. You can split up your movement. Any order on your turn, but those are the 3 things you get to do. Then there's also the special thing, which is reactions turn in combat. The standard reaction that every creature has is an opportunity attack. That occurs when something moves away from you, and you can use your reaction to get an attack off on them. But other than opportunity attacks and held actions, every reaction you will be able to do will be specified in your features and traits. So, for example, if we come down here and look at Polar Master, we can see that it does modify your reactions with an opportunity attack. if things enter the reach instead of leaving the reach. So what this means for Craster is if this wyvern comes and tries to attack him, he can use his spear to attack the wyvern as his reaction outside of his turn. You get one reaction per round. Not necessarily per round, but between your turns. So if I use my reaction to attack the wyvern when it comes in, and then the round ends and another creature comes, I can't use a reaction again until it's my turn again. Those are the three basic things that, I guess four basic things that you do in combat, and deciding what you do is just choosing which of those four you do and in what order. Sometimes you want to use your movement, sometimes you don't. Nothing's forcing you to. You don't have to use bonus actions or actions either. In fact, lots of characters will not have bonus actions that they can take, especially at early levels. Actions will almost always be taken because that's the generic attack a creature, cast a spell kind of thing. Okay, so we figured out that Craster wants to come closer and shoot this wyvern with his longbow. How do we figure out what happens with that? Well, this is where attack rolls and armor class come in. So here, if we go to Craster's page and look at the actions, we have our longbow attack right here, and it has a +6 to hit. It's a magical longbow. We get +3 from Proficiency, +2 from Dexterity, and +1 from the magical longbow for a +6. So launch an attack, we would roll a d20 and add 6 to it, and then compare that value to the wyvern's armor class. So I rolled here, and we can see I got a 17. I rolled a 11 on the d20, and I have a +6 modifier, so the total result is 17. And then we compare that to the wyvern's armor class. Looking at the wyvern page, what you guys won't need, this is for DMs, we see it has an armor class of 13. So a 17 is greater than 13, which means that my attack would hit, and I would then roll damage for the longbow attack. And that's right here on the D&D Beyond sheet. We can see it's 1d8 +3, 1d8 from the longbow, +3 is +2 from dexterity, and +1 from the magicalness of the longbow. So we'd roll, and this is rolling the d8 here, and then we add 3 to it and get the total damage. So here we can see I did 5 damage. I rolled a 2, +3 is 5. And then your DM will do all the necessary upkeep, take 5 off the wyvern's hit points. And there's that. That's the attack successfully completed. For armor class versus AC, if your attack roll equals or exceeds the armor class, that means it hits. So if I had gotten a 13 instead of a 17, that would still have hit. But if I had gotten a 12, that means I would have missed. So we can see if I just roll a couple more, that's a 24. That's also a hit. Another 24. Another 17. I'm just hitting this guy constantly. Someday I'll miss. There we go, an 8. If I roll an 8, that means I miss. And your DM will narrate what that means. Maybe the arrow bounced off the tough hide of the wyvern. Maybe I just missed. But if you miss, you just don't roll any damage, and life continues as normal. One final thing with attack rolls is natural 1s and natural 20s. You've probably heard people talking about critical hits. That's when you roll a natural 20, which is when you roll the d20 and it shows a 20 on the face, the maximum possible roll. And that's a crit. And that just adds extra damage. Some items or classes have effects that modify crits, but Craster doesn't have any of that. So a critical hit will just mean you roll the damage die of the attack twice. So if I crit with a longbow attack, that would be a natural 20. It automatically hits, and I would do 2d8s +3. So instead of rolling 1d8 +3, I would roll 2d8 plus 3. We can see that's 9 damage. 2 plus 4 plus 3. 9 damage on a critical hit. And that will change every time. Natural ones, some people play with critical fumbles. I think most people don't. And as rules as written, a natural one just means you automatically miss, even if you would have hit normally. So if I had a plus 15 to hit, there's no way I can miss this wyvern. But if I roll a natural one, that means I still miss, even though I have a plus 15. It's kind of the opposite of a crit. And then, of course, all this stuff goes the opposite direction. So if this wyvern attacks Crastor, flies in, tries to bite him, we have Crastor's armor class here. It's 18. And the DM will roll the attack for the wyvern. They get a 26, which will definitely hit an armor class of 18. Past your shield and your breastplate and just takes a big bite of your shoulder. And you take 13 piercing damage. And then you just come up here, 13 damage, and you're ready to move on. This would change to 47. Just a couple things with attack rolls. Range and reach. So ranged weapons will have a range listed next to them. For a longbow, it's 150 feet and 600 feet. The smaller number is the normal range. You just roll normal attacks at enemies inside that range. The larger number is long range attacks. You can attack an enemy within that range, but if they're outside of your normal range, you would roll with disadvantage. And we'll cover what that means in a little bit. But for example, if Crastor is way over here, 300 feet away from this wyvern, he could still shoot a longbow at it. He'd be more likely to miss, but he could shoot a longbow at it. Reach is a property of melee weapons. You can see a spear. I guess it's also thrown, but a spear has a reach of 5 feet, which means you can attack enemies directly next to you. Some weapons have a reach of 10 feet, halberds, pikes, that sort of thing. And some monsters have reaches of 10 feet or even further. But it's just a number to keep in mind because that affects opportunity attacks. So Crastor would not be able to make a melee attack with the spear from right here. You'd have to get close enough to stab the wyvern.
Hey DBrock, we got a few questions in the chat if you want to take a look at them.
Sure. What chat are they in?
This is in the special events text channel.
Oh, I had that muted for some reason.
So it's the most two that these are from Twitch, Maker and Geek on Twitch.
Why do they call it a bonus action? What is a free action? That is a good question. And I was actually going to talk about free actions next, but a bonus action is just what they decided to call it. The idea is that it's less than a normal action. Generally, a bonus action will be less impactful than a normal action. It's just kind of an extra thing your character can do on their turn. A free action is slightly more difficult. As part of your action, you can do some stuff that is kind of ancillary to your action, but might not be considered directly part of it. So, for example, the classic example is if you're attacking someone with a sword, it is a free action to draw your sword from its sheath as part of the attacking action. But if you're not taking the attack action, then drawing the sword would have to be its own thing, would be a use an object action. How you can decide what you can do if you're doing improvised things, it's mostly up to your DM, but with some common sense. Just quickly scooping something off the ground is generally going to be a free action, because you're also probably going to use that object you're picking up. So you can consider picking it up off the ground as the free action part of that action. But if you're doing something more complicated, like if you're rooting around in a bag to pull out the correct item, your DM would probably roll that, takes a full action to complete. There's not like limited things you can do in D&D. You can just generally tell your DM what you want to do, and they will tell you what it costs to do it, kind of thing. Then we have the second question here. Is it more or less correct to roll a natural 20 roll twice to get your damage versus roll once and double that number? I'm not really sure what you mean the natural 20 roll twice. So the rules that's written for a crit are that when you roll a natural 20 on your attack roll, your attack automatically hits. And then the damage die, which depends on the weapon. For a spear, it's a d6. For a longbow, it's a d8. You roll twice as many of those. So instead of 1d8 plus 3, we have 2d8 plus 3. Or instead of 1d6 plus 7, we have 2d6 plus 7. I know in some older editions there was things about confirming crits, but D&D 5e doesn't use any of that. If you roll a natural 20, that's a critical hit. There are some optional rules that increase the amount of critical damage you deal. I know there's one that instead of rolling the die again, you add the maximum possible from the die. So for that, instead of rolling 2d6 plus 7, we would roll 1d6 plus 13. That ends up doing more damage because some people don't like that criticals can theoretically do less than normal attacks. If I roll a longbow and I crit and I get a 2 and a 3 on the dice, I do a total of 8 damage, or yeah, 8 damage. But if I just roll an 8 on the die for a normal attack, that's 11 damage. It can be kind of counterintuitive, but rules is written, that's how it works. You just roll the extra damage die. Another thing to mention with natural 20s is that for the critical rolls are only for attack rolls. If you roll a natural 20 on a nature check or any ability check, and your total doesn't add up to a DC, maybe it's a very difficult thing, or maybe you're just terrible at whatever you're trying to do and you have a -5 to it, then you can still fail even though you rolled a natural 20. It's only attack rolls that have the critical rule. Speaking of attack rolls, you don't have to use a weapon to roll an attack roll. Some spells also have attack rolls, and I don't have any of them here. So I'm going to switch to another character to show you that real quick. This is a level 18 cleric, and we can see that their spells include Guiding Bolt, which is a ranged spell attack against the target. And here you just do the same thing. You roll your die, you add the modifier. This is level 18, so it's a very high modifier. And then you see what that is. A 21 would definitely hit a wyvern. It's the same thing as attacking with a weapon. You're just using the spell to attack, and any spell you cast that has that will tell you to make a spell attack against the target. Oops. Shoot, that's not what I wanted. All right, let's talk about saving throws and saving throw DCs. On the spells tab here, you can see it has your listed modifiers. So +5 for spell attacks. Doesn't affect Craster because he doesn't have any attack rolls. And he's a spell DC of 13. Which once again, he doesn't have anything that uses those. So we're going back to Marishala. So here we can see Marishala has a save DC of 20. Once again, level 18, very powerful character. And if we look at, say, Fairy Fire, it will say any creature in the area when the spell is cast is outlined in white if it fails a Dexterity saving throw. And this is where the saving throws come in. Most attacks don't include saving throws. Some have extra effects that force you to make saving throws. But a saving throw is something that you make to avoid something bad. In this case, if someone's casting Fairy Fire on you, you would make a Dexterity saving throw and see if that saving throw beats their spell save DC, which is listed here on your character sheet under your spells tab at the top. And any monsters, your DM will know their spell DC. So the monster's casting throw, you would just click this button, say, okay, I got a 14 on my dexterity saving throw. And then your DM would tell you what happens after that. So, for example, if I'm trying to avoid a dragon's breath, you'd say, oh, 14 doesn't quite cut it. You don't manage to dodge away and you take 54 fire damage. That sort of thing. With spells you can cast, you can force enemies to make saving throws, and all monsters have their own saving throw modifiers. And in that case, I'll just cast the spell and tell your DM what your DC is. Say, okay, I'm going to cast Fairy Fire on that group of goblins. The DC is 20, Dexterity saving throw. And then your DM would roll the saving throw for those guys and tell you what happens. Oh, they all failed. They're all outlined in this brilliant purple light. So saving throws are kind of the opposite of attack rolls, where instead of the attacker making a roll to see if they hit the target is making a roll to see if they avoid a negative effect. Kind of two sides to the same coin, just depending on what you're using and who's doing the roll. And for saving throws, if you're saving throw, that means you pass. So if I roll a 17 on the die and I have +3 for 20, that equals 20, and I would pass that saving throw. The general rule of thumb for tied is that whoever rolled the die wins the tie. In combat, you're fighting a powerful monster and it's dealing a bunch of damage. And there's a chance that, you take all your damage and you go down to 0 hit points. It doesn't matter how much damage you take past 0, unless it equals your max HP. We'll get to that. But if you go to 0 hit points, like we'll say Craster's been fighting this guy for a while and he's losing this fight, and he goes to 0 hit points. This is where death saves come into play. So for death save, when you hit 0 hit points, you are unconscious and incapacitated. You basically just fall down to the battlefield and can't do anything. And the fight continues on around you. And at the start of your turn, while you're at 0 hit points, you roll a death saving throw. On D&D Beyond, it's a little counterintuitive to reach. You have to click in this box and then roll this die here. A death saving throw is just a DC 10 straight up check. If you get higher than 10 or higher, it's a success. And if you get lower than 10, it's a failure. If you get 3 failures, you are dead. If you get 3 successes, you are stabilized and no longer at risk of dying. There's some things that can modify this. If you roll a natural 1 on your saving throw, that counts as 2 failures. So if I rolled a nat 1 for my next roll here, I'd mark off 2 failures. If you roll a natural 20, you immediately spring up, no longer unconscious at 1 hit point. So a natural 20 just says, no, you're not dying today. Stand up and keep on fighting. Any healing while you're at 0 hit points will just heal you and you will no longer be unconscious and dying. It's basically the same as healing normally. You don't get any lingering effects from having been at 0, except that you're lying down, so you have to stand up. And then you can just continue fighting. If something attacks you while you are making death saving throws, then you add into failures. Just normal attack or any damage is 1 failure. If it's a critical hit, that's 2 failures. And one thing to note is that if you are unconscious, then any attack, any melee attack against you is a crit with a sword. That's 2 failures. So when you're rolling death saving throws, your life is on the line. You could die at any time, and hopefully your companions have some way to heal you or stabilize you. If someone else is dying and you wish to stabilize them, but you don't have any way to heal them, you can make a medicine check to try to stabilize them. And just basically that would mark off 3 successes and they would no longer be at risk of dying. I think that's listed. Lets you try to stabilize a dying companion.
Hey, DBrock, we have a
Hopeful.
question in chat again if you want to check it out.
Do monsters have levels like the characters? Um, Not really. It's always possible for the DM to make an enemy that just has character levels, though it's not recommended. Because characters have lots of stuff going on. Like, look at all this stuff, and uh, that would just be so much work to do as a DM. Monsters have their own page, and they have something called CR, challenge rating, which approximates how strong they are. But they don't specifically have levels or character abilities unless your DM gives them character levels. But for example, a wyvern is a CR6 creature, which means that if you're fighting one around level 6, that's probably approximately a fair fight, give or take, for your party, not for yourself. The AC and HP from monsters are kind of calculated. There's a whole thing in the Dungeon Master's Guide. It's super complicated and well beyond the scope of this workshop. But if you're interested in that, I think Sam is planning on doing some DM training stuff soon. So ask him about learning how to become a DM. But for a player's perspective, the DM will just tell you whenever your attacks hit in order not to die. Conditions. Conditions are something you add in to combat. There's a um, little box here that shows all the conditions. And they do special things in combat, and you can read through them and see what they all do. And here you can like apply conditions, and it'll say you're blinded, kind of thing. Usually these will be applied with spells or some other special effect. Prone and grappled are the only ones that are easy to apply without those things. Prone is just lying down on the ground, and grappled is a special attack thing that we will potentially cover later. But these are just the conditions. You can read through them and see what they all do. Unconscious is one of the things you get when you're rolling death saving throws. But these things you don't have to worry about too much at early levels because you won't encounter them very much. But if someone says, okay, the spell is cast on you, you are now poisoned, you go here and poison, you can read you have disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. Then we have spell casting and concentration. Spell casting has some extra rules that I think I should mention now. The most important of which is concentration, where some spells have this little C next to them, which indicates concentration. And that means you need to concentrate spell, and it's its own special thing, where you can only concentrate on one spell at a time, and if you try to concentrate on something else, the spell will end. And if you take any damage while you're concentrating, you need to roll a concentration check, which is a Constitution saving throw. So if Craster is concentrating on Hunter's Mark and he gets hit by the Wyvern, you roll a Constitution saving throw, and he gets a 13. And the DC of the saving throw is half of the damage you took, or 10, whichever is higher. So if Craster took 13 damage from the Wyvern, then he would need to make a 10 or higher on his Constitution check. But if he took 28 damage from the Wyvern, he would need to hit a 14 or higher. Concentration is generally for more powerful spells that have lasting effects, and shouldn't it would be too powerful if they could be stacked on each other. So stuff like silence and spike growth are also concentration. But something to keep in mind with spell casting. There's also a lot more rules about spell casting, extra than combat. The other big thing with spell casting is spell slots. You can see here, Craster has 4 spell slots here and 3 here. These are for first level spells and second level spells. and casting a spell uses up one of the spell slots, which are usually refreshed when you take a long rest, when you rest for the night. And so this just shows how many spells Craster can cast per day, kind of thing. So if I cast Hunter's Mark on the Wyvern, that's one of my first level spells gone. And maybe, I don't need to cast 7 different spells on this Wyvern, but these have to last me all day. So if I fight this one Wyvern and then there's a troll later, and then there's another thing, maybe there's a giant later, I can run out of spell slots pretty quickly. So you need to keep in mind that with spell slots, they are a limited resource, and you can't just cast the same spell constantly every combat. There's also a thing called cantrips. Um, Rangers do not get cantrips, but clerics do. We'll take a look at this guy. And we can see the cantrips are listed here at the top. Cantrips you can cast for free at any time. They're generally less powerful than spells and not super strong. So like you give a slight bonus to creatures making a saving throw, or you do a little bit of damage. Ignore the numbers, they're high because it's level 18. So cantrips are, you can cast them anytime, no cost. Leveled spells, you have a cost. You can only cast so many of them per day. And once again, your spell slots will come back after finishing a long rest. And if they come back at other times, your class will specify when you get your spell slots back. Any question on these combat basics so far? I see there's one from Twitch. If a character dies, are they dead for just that session? Well, for the one-shots for the newbie sessions, yes. You can always make a new character. If you're in a campaign, then it's a little more difficult and you need to talk to your DM about what happens. Usually you can always just make a new character who will come in and replace your previous character. But there are also methods of resurrection. There's some spells that can do it, high-level spells, some lower-level spells that have conditions. But if you die, that means that you're out of it, you're dead. And you'll have to find a way to come back, or you can write that character off and maybe they died doing what they loved and it's time for a new character to come in. For Maker and Geek on Twitch, if you have multiple enemies, once you cast Hunter's Mark and defeat them, can you move Hunter's Mark to another enemy? This is one of the things that's a good example of how D&D works. Because the answer is in general, no. But for Hunter's Mark, yes. And this is where specific triumphs over general. So if you cast any normal spell, like say I cast Silence and there's an enemy in its area, but Hunter's Mark specifically says, if the target drops to 0 hit points before this spell ends, you can use a bonus action on a subsequent turn of yours to mark a new creature. So in general, no, but Hunter's Mark specifically has a clause saying yes. And keep in mind that you still need to keep concentration on the spell during this. You can't kill a wyvern and drop concentration and walk off and 3 hours later fight a troll and try to move the Hunter's Mark to the troll. This Hunter's Mark lasts for 1 hour, and you need to maintain concentration to keep it going. Any other
That's everything so far.
questions? We'll go into a little more slightly advanced combat rules here. I'll talk about movement. I've kind of glossed over movement because its basic form is very easy. You can move 40 feet. But there are some different types of movement. There's climbing speed, swimming speed, flying speed, a bunch of things. Usually your character won't have to worry about these until later. But for example, this wyvern has a fly speed of 80 feet, which means it can walk on the ground at 20 feet per turn, which is not fast, or it can fly at 80 feet, which is very fast. And these are different things you can keep in mind during combat. You can cast the fly spell to give someone flight and a fly speed in combat, and that could be very effective. Or if you're fighting underwater and you don't have a swim speed, then that could be trouble, and you might need to figure out a way to either get on land or get a swim speed somehow. I should mention that you can still swim even if you don't have a swim speed. You're just much slower and you get a penalty to combat. Then there's also difficult terrain. Some spells or abilities can create difficult terrain. For example, spike growth says the area becomes difficult terrain for the duration. And that just means you move at half speed through difficult terrain. If you could move 40 feet before you move 20 feet, each foot of movement costs 2 feet of your movement points. So if I walked 10 feet through difficult terrain, that would use half my movement because that's worth 20 feet. And once again, other types of movement can just ignore that. If I cast spike growth under this wyvern, it is not going to care. It's just going to fly right over it. So keep that in mind. Then there are also some special senses, mostly for monsters, but the big one is dark vision, which lets you see in the dark up to a certain range. And these can affect combat a lot. Being blinded or being in darkness when you can't see is very detrimental to your fighting ability. And there are spells that create darkness. Fighting at night can be a thing. You might want to carry a torch. But just keep in mind that, it's not as simple as these two creatures on an open plain. You got extra stuff going on, and some monsters have super special stuff that lets them sense tremors in the ground or have blind sight they don't even need to see, or see invisible creatures. There's a whole bunch of things. But for early levels and for new characters, the big one is dark vision and fighting at night. If you don't have dark vision, you will need a light source to fight at night at all effectively, or in a dark place like a cave. Now let's go into some of the extra actions. So far, I've only mentioned attacking and casting a spell, but there are a lot more. There's a whole list of them here. Dash, dodge, disengage, grapple, help, hide, improvise, ready, search, shove, use an object. I'll just go ahead and categorize them real quick. Dash, dodge, and disengage are mostly repositioning stuff or defensive stuff. Or dash lets you move up to your movement speed again on your turn. So if Craster dashed, he could move 40 feet and then another 40 feet with his dash for a total of 80 feet. Dodge makes you more difficult to hit, gives you disadvantage. Disengage lets you move around without taking opportunity attacks, which I haven't covered yet. Grapple and shove are special attack actions that you can read up more. They're pretty complicated. Help helps one of your allies, gives them advantage in doing something. Hide makes you do a stealth roll to try to hide from the enemies. Improvise is just using random stuff. Search is looking for stuff, and use an object is using an object. Ready in action is the only one that I think is complicated enough to go into detail. And useful enough to use pretty often. Ready in action is where you say, I want to do something, but I don't want to do it right now. I want to do it at some time in the future. Maybe you're waiting for an ally to light up the enemy so they're easier to hit. Or maybe you're waiting to see if someone comes out from behind that bush to hit them more easily. In that case, you would ready an action, in this case, an attack. And when you do so, you need to specify the trigger of your action when you're going to release it. So, for example, if Craster is readying an action, it would say, okay, as soon as that wyvern flies 50 feet away from me, I'm going to shoot it with my longbow. And if the wyvern doesn't fly 50 feet away, then he just doesn't use that action. But if it does, then it does. You just shoot it then. And it's not on your turn, it's on the wyvern's turn that would happen. Readying an action uses your reaction to trigger the action. So it uses both your action and your reaction for the round. But it can be very useful if you need to time something or if you're trying to coordinate with allies. I should also mention that if you're readying a spell, that in itself is concentration. So you cannot concentrate on a spell and ready another spell. While I'm here, I missed a couple of things that I've mentioned. Advantage and disadvantage. Are relatively simple. Advantage is just rolling 2d20s instead of 1. And you take the higher roll. And it makes it more likely to hit or do whatever. So if I was making a spear attack with advantage, you can see I rolled an 11 and a 19, and the 19 is higher, so that's the one I would use. Advantage is generally a symbol that you have something in combat that makes it easier to do something, or not even in combat. But for example, if I had an ally giving help action, distracting the wyvern, making it easier to hit it, that would give me advantage on my attack. There's other things like Fairy Fire gives advantage. It's relatively common to get advantage somehow. Disadvantage is the opposite. You roll 2d20s and you take the lower roll. So here I get a 25 and a 26. So I'd still use the 25. So disadvantage can still hit even if you're rolling with it. But it makes it less likely to hit or succeed in whatever you're trying to do. Once again, the opposite of advantage. In this case, it's because something's going wrong. Maybe I'm blinded for some reason, and I know where the wyvern is. It's not a very stealthy beast, but still blinded, so I have disadvantage on the attack. You may have seen I rolled those really easily. If you're using Beyond 20, D&D Beyond, holding Shift when you click the button will roll with advantage, and holding Control will roll with disadvantage. We may as well answer these questions now. When it comes to weapons your character uses, do you design your starting weapon? You don't design a weapon. There's a lot of weapons you can choose from. Martial weapons and simple weapons are the two classes. But there are a bunch, and they all have pre-listed damage dice, and they all use attacking with any weapon is always the same. It's always rolling a d20 and then adding your modifier. And then the damage is just determined by the weapon. So like a pike would do 1d10 piercing damage, and a greatsword would do 2d6 slashing damage. That's kind of the difference between weapons. If you want a custom weapon, you would have to talk to your DM, but there's already lots of options out there, so generally you can find one of those. Or if you really want a custom weapon, find one of them and reflavor it to be your custom weapon. Like maybe you want a pistol you can shoot with one hand, and that doesn't exist. It's cool, whatever. You can say, okay, it's pretty much a hand crossbow, so I'll just have it have the stats of a hand crossbow and call it a pistol kind of thing. Starting weapons are determined when you create your character. It will give you a list of equipment you start with, and you can select your weapon from that. And then the second question, can you specify that you want to cut off one of the wyvern's wings, or is damage exclusively reducing HP? You can absolutely specify you want to do stuff like cut off wings or stab out an eye. But in general, if it's going to cripple the creature or make it unable to fight, or really have any extra effect beyond damage, you pretty much need to defeat it. You couldn't say like, I want to slice off the wing with this attack roll and just roll an attack and succeed and cut off the wing. It's pretty much just damage. Though this is another thing where DMs can vary. And some DMs would say, yeah, if you roll a crit, you can absolutely cut off the wing. But as rules as written, the standard rules, you just do damage. You don't maim with your attacks. There's something else I forgot to mention, but I'm sure I'll remember. Going further into some of the slightly more advanced combat, there are controlled creatures. You can get these certain ways. Maybe you tame a wolf with your godly animal handling. Maybe you're casting Conjure Animals to summon up some allies, or you have a familiar who's darting in and out of combat and helping with stuff. Um, these are kind of difficult because you're now controlling multiple characters instead of just one, and you have to think about what they're doing on their turns as well. But in general, whatever you're using to get the ally will specify how you control the creature. So some spells, for example, conjure an ally and it says they obey your verbal commands. So in that case, you just say, okay, I'd like to tell the wolf to attack that goblin over there. Easy enough. Some of them obey your telepathic commands. You just control them with your mind. Generally, I don't think there are many DMs who harp on this stuff and ask, like, could you really tell your wolf to go and push him over and drag him into that bramble bush kind of thing? Um, but it is possible to control other creatures. And when you do, you basically just tell your DM what you want to do, and they will move the creatures for you. Or if it's something that you're getting pretty often, like if it's your wolf companion, you might get the stat block of a wolf and just do your rolls from there. Um, Vulnerabilities, resistances, and immunities. These modify how much damage you take. If we go back to Craster, we can see he has resistance to fire from that Fey portal. And these you can get from spells or from other effects. Monsters in general have more of these than players. But they just modify how much damage you take. If you're resistant to a type of damage, that means you take half the damage from it, rounded down. So if I took 15 damage from a firebolt, well, I'm resistant to fire, so that means I'd only take 7.5, rounded down as 7 damage instead. If you're vulnerable to a damage type, then you take twice as much damage. If I was vulnerable to lightning and got hit with a lightning bolt for 15 damage, I take 30 damage instead. And immunity just means you take no damage from that completely. Once again, that's not very common with characters, but some monsters will have those. So be careful, you can throw fireballs at certain monsters all you want, and it won't do any damage because they are immune to fire. Traps and triggered effects. This is a little more advanced than DM's part, but if you're fighting in a location with traps, or even if you're just going through a trapped hallway, sometimes you'll be an initiative in combat, even if you can't see any enemies, and these will generally trigger on certain initiative counts. So if you're moving through a trapped hallway, let's say, there's something that happens at initiative count 20, and then you dash through, and then something happens at initiative count 10, and then someone else dashes through. And they act almost like creatures, except instead of taking turns, they just have effects that happen at certain times in the initiative order. Then there's also triggered effects. Some spells do this, like Glyph of Warding, I believe you can specify what happens to cause the glyph to activate, and those just happen immediately when their triggering effect happens. And these are actually slightly more common for players to have, not like Glyph of Warding, but kind of rider effects on other things. Like, for example, if a paladin hits an enemy with an attack, they can choose to smite them or not. And that doesn't take any action or bonus action. It's just an extra triggered effect they have when they hit an enemy. They can choose to smite. So those are basically free, happen instantaneously, and are almost, pause combat for the triggering effect to resolve. And then there's special lair and legendary actions. These are from monsters. And they let monsters act outside of their turn and initiative. So don't be too surprised if you're fighting a boss monster and it moves when it's not its turn. And as rules is written, it's allowed to do that. Your DM knows what they're doing. But as a player, you don't need to worry about having rare or legendary actions. Um, all right, let's take a look. Any other questions before we go into some examples of, see exactly how combat looks like?
Actually, we just got one right now. Let me post it to Discord. Okay.
Is there something? Or oh, here we go. So say you want a sword and it has the stats of a longsword, but the blade is made of plasma. Um, well, this is the great thing about D&D is that there are tons of weapons out there, tons of magical weapons, and chances are you can find something like what you're looking for. And in your case, I believe you want this. This is a magical weapon. It's a longsword. You can use a bonus action to cause a blade of pure radiance to spring into existence. It has the finesse property. You gain a +2 bonus to attack and damage rolls, and it deals radiant damage instead of slashing damage. So if you want a lightsaber, then here you go, and talk to your DM about getting this in for your character somehow. This is a little more powerful than what a level 1 or a level 5 character would have. This is more like level 10 kind of thing. So you can't really expect to get something more powerful than every other player. They exist and there are magical items, and if you want something that's beyond the basics, just talk to your DM and see if they can put it in somehow, or if you can get it in a certain way, and make sure it's balanced and stuff. It's really cool to have super powerful weapons that burn undead and leave flames in their wake. But if you're the guy who has that sword and you're hitting enemies for 50 damage every turn, and then there's the guy next to you who didn't give himself a magical sword and he's hitting people for 15 damage per turn, one of you is going to be having more fun than the other. And you don't want to make other players feel like they're worthless or not effective. D&D is collaborative. You're building a story with your party and your DM, and you need to keep that in mind and not just play for yourself. I'm not saying you can't have a really cool magic item. I'm saying you need to talk to your DM and make sure everyone's on board with people having these types of things. Um, any other questions?
Maker in Greek asked, when you are a monk, do you automatically get the extract aspects action? I was about to just respond because it looks like it's unofficial material, like for third level monks, Way of the Cobalt Soul. I don't know if you know anything about that, but I can link that to them.
I don't know the specifics on that, but this is one of those things that's kind of similar to Hunter's Mark, where if you want to do extra stuff, say when you make your character what you can do. So even just for example, this Hunter Ranger here, he's got Primeval Awareness. From the Ranger, you can expend the spell slot to sense whether any of these types of creatures are around. It's just an extra thing that you get for being a ranger, and it will list any extra things you can get here. So this is not something you can just do as a fighter or any character. Um, this is what you get for being a ranger, and it's listed under features and traits. So if you're a monk that's doing stuff and you want to have your action that does something, then it will say in the class. Perhaps a better example is, keep going back to this level 18 cleric. Channel Divinity, where we can see here, you can channel divine energy to feel magical effects. As an action, you can use Channel Divinity and present your holy symbol to dispel any magical darkness within 30 feet. And they must make a con saving throw or take a bunch of radiant damage. This is something you get as a cleric, and it specifically states it takes an action. Here's what it does. Whole thing's laid out, so it's extra beyond the basic rules. And it's listed exactly what happens there. So if you have any questions about that stuff, look at your character sheet and see what it says that you get from your features. I think I'll go ahead and do a quick go ahead and heal you guys up to full. So we'll have Craster fighting this wyvern here. Make sure they start at the correct distance from each other. And we've got these initiatives rolled, but we'll say Craster gets the element of surprise, and this Wyvern is surprised on its first round and doesn't do anything. So Craster, that's the first move. He's going to come out and cast Hunter's Mark, which I should probably be on Craster's character page. He will cast Hunter's Mark on the Wyvern. In this case, we can ignore the roll. It's just casting it. And then he's going to attack with his longbow. Keep in mind, I measured this out. Hunter's Mark is a range of 90 feet, which is how far away he is from this Wyvern. And his longbow has a range of 150 feet, which is certainly in range of that. And Craster has extra attack because he's higher than level 5, which once more you can see here under features and traits. All martial characters except rogues will be able to attack twice with the attack action at level 5. So that's why Craster is attacking twice with his longbow. You see I got a 23 and a 21, both of which will hit. So we'll see how much damage I do. 5 piercing damage, 7 piercing damage. And then we need to add the Hunter's Mark damage in. So looking at Hunter's Mark, you deal an extra 1d6 damage to the target whenever you hit it with a weapon attack. So I hit it twice, so I roll 2d6. So the total is 5 plus 7 plus 4 plus 4, or a total of 20 damage to this Wyvern on this first turn. And your DM will tally us up, keep track of the monster's HP. And then that's the end of Craster's turn. He rode in closer, he used his attack, he used his bonus action. That's movement, action, bonus action. That's all he's doing. This Wyvern now is going to take its turn, and it does the same things, actions, bonus action, and movement. In this case, it's going to move to Craster 80 feet because that's its fly speed. So it flaps over here. And unfortunately, Craster forgot that Wyverns have a higher reach on their attacks than 5 feet. He tried to position himself so that he would avoid taking damage, but as you can see, the Stinger has a reach of 10 feet, as does the Bite attack. So this Wyvern's actually going to be able to attack Craster. So we have an 11, which will miss, and a 15, which will also miss, because Craster's armor class is 18. You got pretty lucky there. The Wyvern rolled pretty low on its attacks. So he takes no damage, dodges away from all this stuff. And then he'll throw down his longbow, pull out his spear, and ride into battle as Centaur does. This is Craster's turn again. The Wyvern ended its turn because it moved and attacked, and it doesn't have any bonus actions. So Craster is going to attack it twice with his spear. A 24 and a 15 both hit because the Wyvern has an armor class of 3 or 13. So we'll roll the damage. And this is a versatile weapon, which Craster is using one-handed. He has a shield in his other hand. But in this case, it just means choosing this damage roll instead of this damage roll. So it's always using the one-handed damage roll. And you will notice that the one-handed damage roll will be higher than the two-handed damage roll, usually, because he has a bonus feature that deals extra damage when he's attacking with one hand. So looking at this, we have 9 damage plus 10 is 19, but we still have our Hunter's Mark going. So we need to add that up for another 8 damage. So that's a total of 27 from those attacks. And then he has his bonus action still because he didn't cast Hunter's Mark this turn. And he has this Polar Master bonus attack, which is when you take the attack action with a glaive, halberd, quarterstaff, or spear, he's using a spear. You can use a bonus action to make a melee attack with the opposite end of the weapon. It uses the same ability modifier and has a damage die of d4. And if we go here and look at our bonus actions, we can see there's a Polar Master bonus attack, which is once more an attack roll. 23 will definitely hit for 8 bludgeoning damage. And that's another attack that hits with Hunter's Mark. So need to add another d6. So 10 total damage. So that's not what I wanted. So that's done the first two rounds of combat. The first round, the Wyvern was surprised, and Craster attacked it with his longbow after casting Hunter's Mark and did some damage. And then they came in melee and attacked each other. The Wyvern missed because Craster has a pretty good armor class, and Craster hit because the Wyvern has a pretty bad armor class. And Craster's done a ton of damage to this Wyvern, taking out about half its HP. Looks like he's doing pretty well in this fight. Level 8 Ranger versus a CR6 monster is pretty equal in terms of fighting. So for this one-on-one, we don't get stuff like help or that sort of thing. But if there was another creature, then they could come in at their own armor, at their own initiative, and say there's a wolf that's helping Craster out, and it comes in right now. You would just roll initiative for it and give it its own place on the turn order, and it would do its own thing. Once more, every creature has its whole turn, which is movement, action, bonus action, and any reactions. So let's say this Wyvern doesn't like how this fight's going and tries to fly away. This is where we can use our reactions. So if it's an attack of opportunity, the Wyvern is leaving our reach, which means we could hit it with the spear, and it's moving far enough away that we can no longer hit it with the spear. So we can use an attack of opportunity. I think it's listed here. Opportunity attack. You make an opportunity attack when a hostile creature that you can see moves out of your reach, which is 5 feet for the spear. So I'm using my reaction to make one melee attack. And you don't get the extra attack bonus for this. It's only the attack action on your turn that you get that. So Craster will give it a stab as it tries to fly away. Hit once again because he's a god. Deal 12 piercing damage. And an extra 1 from the Hunter's Marks, another 13 damage. And then this Wyvern flies away, and it's much faster and Craster, and he has no hope of catching it. And at that point, if I was the DM, I'd say, okay, this combat ends. You defeated the Wyvern. It's a pretty one-sided defeat. It flew away in terror, and Craster would get any experience from defeating it, which is a good time to segue onto how leveling works. So there's two ways of leveling. There's milestone and experience. Milestones is basically your DM tells you when you level, and you just go and level up and pick your new stuff then. Experience, you get experience for defeating monsters and solving puzzles and traps and basically doing stuff that an adventurer would do, and it will tell you how much experience you get. So let's say Craster gets 2,000 experience for defeating this Wyvern. On the D&D Beyond, we'd go to Manage Experience, type 2,000, apply changes, and that's enough to get him to level 9. To actually level up on D&D Beyond, you go here. That's not what I wanted, sorry. Go here to manage levels. We can see we have 8 levels in Ranger. We'll go to 9 levels in Ranger. We'll come through and see we don't have to choose anything. But if we go to our character sheet again, and go to features and traits, we'll see what we get. And I believe we got Lance Stride, or I guess it's an 8th level thing. When you decide what you get, at each level up, you go to your character table here. This is the D&D Beyond character table, and it will show you everything you get when you level up. So going from 8th level to 9th level, we can see our proficiency bonus increased. If we look here, it's now +4. So that increases all of these. It was +8 to hit, now it's a +9, +7, all of these increased. Proficiency is very important. That's a very large boon. And then we get 3rd level spells. So I'd go here and look at the spells tab, go to manage spells. And then you can see we can learn 3rd level spells. Maybe I want Water breathing as a 3rd level spell. And we've got 2 3rd level spell slots now. Yeah, that's generally how it works. For D&D Beyond, you just go and manage levels and then select the level you want. And if you're choosing stuff when you level up, um, you can see it will tell you what you need to choose. So here we choose one of these. I'll tell you what you pick. And here, you choose an ability score improvement, improve the strength. And then if we go to the character sheet for this new level 12 ranger, we can see these attacks are now higher. It's a +10 for the spear because we increased the strength up to 20. And we now have this Whirlwind Attack thing, which will be listed here. And I'll tell you what it does. So you can use your attack to make a ranged attack against any number of creatures within 10 feet. So basically, if there's a group of enemies, you could shoot it with your longbow once for each enemy, and then you just roll longbow attacks for each enemy. Any other questions? That's how you apply these numbers to actual combat, and a little bit on all the different things you can do in combat. But any questions, please feel free to type them out, and we'll hopefully clear away any confusion you have. What's the best way to find pods friendly to newbies? Well, this server is a great start. It's specifically newbie friendly. If you're looking outside of the server, generally tags will be newbie friendly. But really, it's kind of you gotta put yourself out there and get lucky in a way. There's more DMs than players, so finding a group can be pretty difficult. And that's kind of one of the goals of this whole Discord server is to get new players into dipping their feet in and getting a little D&D and hoping that they can get their own group and have fun playing D&D. Any other questions?
Nothing over from the Twitch side either. But yeah, feel free to post them. Is that the end of the slides, or was there anything more?
That's the end of the slides. Yeah, I was just demonstrating the this combat here between Craster and this Wyvern.
Okay. Well, we can give everyone another minute. So last chance for questions. And while we're waiting, I will just let everyone know that. Well, first off, thanks DBrock for hosting this and walking through a bunch of these topics. This is very helpful. A lot of just new good things for new players to understand as they go into their first games.
Yeah.
And if you ended up missing any part of it, there will be a VOD that you can watch later. So it'll automatically be on Twitch, and then if DBrock's okay with it, we can put it on YouTube as well, and then you can always go and check it out there. And let's see.
Yeah, I'm fine with putting it on YouTube.
Okay, cool. So yeah, you can check it out in either of those places. And cool. Yeah, I don't see any other questions, so I think we might be all set.
Yeah, well, I'll stick around here for a bit, but feel free to leave, and if you want to ask questions in voice chat, then feel free. But I'll just stick around here for a bit.
Cool. All right, well, thanks everyone for tuning in. I'm going to take the stream down, but yeah, DBrock's in the server here, so if you have further questions, you can hang out or shoot him a message later. Otherwise, thanks. Have a great night.
Yeah, thanks for coming by, and hopefully people learn stuff and will be a little less confused.